There's a particular kind of silence that settles into your life when you've been thinking too clearly for too long. A silence that has nothing to do with the absence of noise, but everything to do with the sudden absence of meaning in places where meaning used to live so comfortably that you never questioned it. You sit in conversations that once animated you, and now you hear the mechanics behind every sentence, the patterns repeating, the scripts running, the need for validation dressed up as opinion, the fear of silence disguised as enthusiasm, and you say nothing because nothing you could say would bridge the gap between what you see and what everyone else seems to be performing. It's not that you've become smarter or better, it's that you've started seeing the stage while everyone else is still deeply invested in the play. And once you see the stage, you can't unsee it. You can't force yourself back into character. You can't pretend the lines are spontaneous when you can hear them being read from a script no one admits exists. This isn't depression, though it feels adjacent to it. This isn't arrogance, though others might name it that when they sense your distance. This is something else entirely, something that doesn't have a convenient diagnosis, something that happens when understanding stops being a tool for navigating life and becomes a kind of solvent that quietly dissolves the structures you used to stand on. You start wondering if something is broken inside you, if you've lost some essential capacity for joy or connection that other people seem to access so easily, and you scan your memories looking for the moment when you became this way, this detached, this calm, this unable to get excited about things that clearly excite others. You watch people celebrate small victories with enormous energy, and you feel nothing, not contempt, not superiority, just nothing, a flatness where there used to be peaks and valleys, and you worry that you've become cold, that you've traded your humanity for clarity, that the price of seeing clearly is feeling less. You test yourself by seeking out experiences that used to move you, music that once made you cry, films that once stirred something deep, conversations with old friends who knew you when you were different, and you find that the mechanisms still work, but the magic is gone, like watching a magician perform a trick after someone has explained how it's done. You can still appreciate the skill, but the wonder has evaporated, replaced by a kind of gentle sadness for the version of you that could be fooled so beautifully. Friends drift away, not because of conflict, but because of something worse, a mutual recognition that you're no longer operating on the same frequency, that your silence makes them uncomfortable, that your lack of reaction to their dramas feels like judgment, even when you intend no judgment at all. And you let them go because holding on would require a performance you can no longer sustain, and you're so tired of performing. The worst part is the self-doubt, the constant questioning of whether you've simply become depressed and are intellectualizing it, whether you're using philosophy as a shield against genuine emotion, whether your detachment is actually wisdom or just fear wearing a more sophisticated costume. You lie awake at night wondering if other people know something you don't, if their ability to invest in trivial things is actually a form of intelligence you lack, if their capacity to care deeply about outcomes that seem meaningless to you represents a kind of emotional health you've lost access to. You watch them plan their futures with such conviction, setting goals, making vision boards, talking about where they'll be in 5 years, and you can't even imagine next month with any clarity because the whole notion of building towards something feels predicated on a belief you no longer hold. The belief that there's somewhere better to get to than here, that accumulation of anything, achieve me, NTS or experiences or relationships will somehow complete you in a way that you aren't complete right now. And maybe they're right. Maybe you're the one who's broken. Maybe this flatness you're experiencing is just depression with a philosophy degree. Maybe you should try harder to care about the things people care about, to get excited about promotions and vacations and new restaurants, and all the small dramas that seem to give other people's lives texture and forward momentum. But what if this isn't a descent into emptiness? What if it's not a sign that you're becoming less human, but rather that you're becoming differently human? What if what you're experiencing isn't the death of feeling, but the death of a particular relationship to feeling, one that required constant stimulation, constant drama, constant distraction from the quiet truth that most of what we call living is actually elaborate avoidance of living. Richard Feynman once said that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool, and what you're going through now is the uncomfortable period after you've stopped fooling yourself but before you've learned to live without the illusions that used to make life feel coherent. You're in the space between stories, the gap between the narrative you were taught to live and the reality you can no longer ignore. And this gap is terrifying because we are creatures who need stories to function. We need to believe that our desires mean something, that our pursuits have inherent value, that the games we play are worth playing. And when those beliefs start to crack, when you stay, try to see that most of what drives human behavior is fear dressed up as ambition, loneliness disguised as networking, emptiness masked by accumulation. You feel unmoored, anchorless, floating in a space where the old meanings no longer hold, but new meanings haven't yet emerged. Think of it like this. You've been living in a house your entire life, and one day you notice that the walls are painted canvases, that the windows show projected scenes rather than actual landscapes, that the floors are stages and the rooms are sets, and at first you think you're going crazy because everyone else is still treating the house as completely real, complaining about the weather outside the fake windows, arranging furniture on the stage floors, arguing about which painted wall color is most authentic. You start to see that what you thought was reality was actually a very convincing simulation, not in some technological sense but in a psychological one, a collective agreement to treat certain illusions as solid ground, and the agreement works beautifully until someone stops agreeing, until someone sees through the paint to the canvas underneath, and that person becomes an involuntary exile, not because they're better or worse, but because they can no longer participate in the consensus trance that makes social reality function smoothly. This is what understanding too much feels like. It's like being the only sober person at a party where everyone else is drunk on meaning, drunk on purpose, drunk on the beautiful lie that what we do matters in the way we pretend it matters. And you can't get drunk anymore, not because you don't want to, but because your system has developed an immunity to the intoxication. And now you have to leer, to be at the party while sober, to move through a world of meaning makers without being able to fully invest in the meanings being made. Or think of it another way. Imagine you've been playing a video game your entire life, completely immersed in the quest, the characters, the stakes, the narrative arc that gives every action significance. And then one day you notice the pixel patterns, the way the non-player characters repeat the same dialogue loops, the invisible walls that keep you on the designated path, the algorithmic structure beneath the apparent fray. Adam? And suddenly you can't unsee the game mechanics. You can't return to the immersive flow state where you believed the quest mattered, where defeating the boss or collecting the items or leveling up your character felt like genuine accomplishment rather than arbitrary markers in a system designed to keep you engaged. Everyone around you is still deeply invested in the game, celebrating their victories, mourning their defeats, forming alliances and rivalries, and you're standing there watching them, unable to explain that what they're doing isn't real in the way they think it's real, unable to participate with the same earnestness because you've seen behind the curtain and there's no way to unsee what you've seen, no way to voluntarily return to the comfortable illusion that made the game playable. The emptiness you feel, the distance, the inability to care about things that once consumed you. This isn't pathology, it's transition. It's the necessary void between two modes of being, and voids are terrifying because we're taught to fill them immediately, to distract ourselves, to generate new projects and goals and relationships that will restore the sense of forward motion. But what if the void isn't asking to be filled? What if it's asking to be inhabited? What if this silence is exactly what needs to happen before something genuinely new can emerge, something that isn't just a rearrangement of old patterns, but an actual different way of meeting reality? You're mourning the death of your investment in things that were never as real as they seemed. And mourning takes time. It takes emptiness. It takes a willingness to not know what comes next. And our culture has no patience for this. Our culture demands that you immediately convert every experience into productivity, every insight into action, every moment of clarity into a new identity. You can perform, but you can't perform this. It's too raw, too unfinished, too fundamentally about unlearning rather than learning. And unlearning doesn't have a highlight reel. It doesn't photograph well. It just looks like someone doing less, caring less, participating less. And from the outside, it's easy to mistake for failure. This period of emptiness serves a function that nothing else can serve. It creates space, actual psychological and emotional space, where there used to be only noise and motion and endless doing. And in that space, you begin to notice things you couldn't notice before. The way your personality is mostly a collection of defensive strategies, developed in childhood, the way your preferences are mostly inherited rather than chosen, the way your opinions are mostly reflections of what you've been exposed to, rather than products of genuine investigation. And these realizations are humbling in a way that has nothing to do with self-criticism and everything to do with seeing clearly how constructed everything is, how little of what you thought was essentially you is actually essential, how much of what you defended as your authentic self was just conditioning wearing the mask of authenticity. This isn't a pleasant process. There's no euphoria in watching your sense of self dissolve, no triumphant moment when you realize that most of what you thought made you special is actually generic, that your struggles are common, your insights are borrowed, your uniqueness is mostly an illusion maintained by selective attention and strategic forgetting. But it's a necessary process if you're ever going to build something real, something that doesn't collapse the moment you examine it honestly. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. This process does not make you special. It does not elevate you above others. It does not grant you permission to look down on people who are still happily engaged with the illusions you've shed. There is a profound temptation, when you start seeing through things, to believe that seeing through things is the same as seeing truly, to confuse the collapse of one set of illusions with the achievement of ultimate reality, to become arrogant in your disillusionment, hard in your clarity, dismissive of people who haven't had their foundations shaken in the same way yours have been shaken. This is the trap of intellectual and spiritual ego, the belief that because you've lost your naivety, you've gained wisdom, when in fact all you've gained is a different kind of naivety, the naivety of thinking that seeing the stage means you're no longer performing, when actually you've just switched from one performance to another, from the performance of investment to the performance of detach me. And detachment can be just as much a mask as enthusiasm, just as much a way of avoiding the vulnerability of genuine presence. You are not better than the people still laughing at the party. You're just in a different location in the same building, and your location doesn't come with moral superiority. It comes with different challenges, different blindnesses, different opportunities for self-deception. The person who has seen through the game can become insufferable, contemptuous of people still playing, convinced that their disillusionment is enlightenment, that their inability to care is actually radical honesty, that their emotional distance is spiritual advancement, and this is perhaps even more deluded than the innocent belief in the game's reality, because it mistakes the destruction of me, yearning for the discovery of truth, when actually truth might require rebuilding meaning on more honest foundations rather than living permanently in the ruins of demolished illusions. You'll meet people who have been through something similar, and some of them will have hardened into cynicism, using their insights as weapons, turning every conversation into an opportunity to demonstrate how much more clearly they see than everyone else, how awake they are compared to the sleeping masses, and you'll recognize in them the danger of your own position, the way clarity can curdle eye, far too cruelty, the way seeing through pretense can become its own form of pretense, more sophisticated but no less defensive, no less afraid, no less lost. So what now? What do you do with this lucidity that doesn't feel like freedom, with this clarity that doesn't bring peace, with this understanding that seems to have subtracted more than it's added? You stop waiting for a return to how things were. You stop hoping that one day you'll wake up and the magic will be restored and you'll care again in that effortless way you used to care, because that's not how this works. You don't go back, you go through. And through means learning to find a different relationship to joy, to pleasure, to satisfaction, to meaning itself. The happiness you used to know was dependent on not seeing too clearly, on maintaining a certain level of illusion about the importance of your activities and the reality of your narratives, and that happiness is gone, but that doesn't mean happiness itself is gone. It means you're being asked to discover a kind of happiness that can coexist with clarity, a kind of joy that doesn't require you to fool yourself, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on distraction. This is quieter, this is less dramatic. This doesn't spike your nervous system with the highs that come from achievement or validation or romantic intensity, but it's more stable, it's more real in the sense that it doesn't collapse the moment you think about it too carefully. It can withstand examination. It can exist in the presence of truth rather than requiring truth to be kept at a distance. You'll notice that small things start to matter in a different way, not because you've convinced yourself they matter, but because when you're not busy, trying to make big things matter. The small things reveal their own quiet significance. The way light moves across a room in the afternoon, the texture of silence in the early morning, the simple fact of being alive without needing it to mean anything. Beyond itself, you'll find yourself less interested in adding to your life and more interested in subtracting from it, in removing the layers of noise and obligation and performance that used to seem necessary. And in that subtraction, you'll discover a kind of simplicity that isn't boring but deeply restful, a sense that you don't have to constantly be becoming someone else, achieving something more, proving so. Meaning to an audience that was mostly in your head anyway. This isn't resignation. It's not giving up, it's giving in to what's actually here instead of what you think should be here. And that giving in feels like defeat at first, like you're accepting less than you deserve. But gradually you realize it's actually accepting reality, instead of your ideas about reality. And reality, when you stop fighting it, has a strange gentleness that ideas never had. The pleasure you find now is different in quality from what you used to seek. It's less about intensity and more about presence, less about the thrill of novelty and more about the depth of attention. You can sit with a cup of coffee in the morning and actually taste it instead of drinking it while planning the day. You can have a conversation without performing or strategizing, just listening and responding from wherever you actually are rather than from where you think you should be. You can watch the sky change colors at sunset without needing to photograph it or share it, or make it mean something beyond the simple fact of its beauty. And these moments, which would have seemed boring or insufficient in your previous mode of being, now carry a weight and richness that all your previous peak experiences somehow lacked. It's not that the peak experiences were false, they were real in their way, but they were also exhausting. They required so much effort to achieve and maintain, so much construction and protection, whereas this new quiet pleasure asks nothing from you except that you be present to receive it. And presence, it turns out, is both simpler and more difficult than anything you've attempted before. There will still be moments of deep loneliness, moments when you feel utterly separate from the human world, when you watch people move through their lives with such certainty and you feel like a ghost observing from somewhere outside the frame. And these moments are real. They're not something you can think your way out of, but they're also not permanent. They're weather. They pass. And each time they pass, you get a little better at not being destroyed by them, at letting them move through you without needing to solve them or escape them. You'll learn that this path you're on doesn't have a destination. There's no final insight that makes everything clear, no ultimate understanding that ties it all together. It's just an ongoing process of seeing and unseeing, of patterns emerging and dissolving, of meanings forming and falling apart. And the freedom isn't in reaching the end of the process, but in no longer needing there to be an end, in being able to move through the uncertainty without constantly grasping for solid ground. The people who love you might not understand what you're going through. They might worry that you've become depressed or cynical or lost, and you won't always be able to explain it to them, because it's not the kind of thing that translates well into the language of normal concern. But if they love you, they'll stay anyway. They'll learn to be with your silence, to not take your distance personally. So to trust that you're not disappearing but transforming. And those relationships, the ones that survive this, will be deeper than anything that came before, because they won't be based on who you're supposed to be, but on who you actually are when you stop trying to be anyone at all. What you're living through is what happens when consciousness outgrows its container, when the self you've been can no longer hold the awareness that's emerging, and the gap between the old self and the new one. That's where you are now, in the gap, in the space where nothing is certain and everything is possible, but in a way that doesn't feel exciting, just vast and quiet and a little sad. This is okay, this is where you need to be. There's no shortcut through it, no hack that lets you skip the uncomfortable parts. You just have to be here, fully here, without trying to make it into something it's not, without narrativizing it into a hero's journey or a dark night of the soul or any other story that would give it shape and meaning. Because maybe it doesn't need shape, maybe it does. It need meaning. Maybe it just needs to be lived moment by moment, breath by breath, with as much honesty as you can manage and as little judgment as possible. You're not broken, you're not enlightened, you're not ahead or behind, you're just here, seeing what you see, feeling what you feel. And that's enough. It has to be enough, because it's all there is, and accepting that it's all there is, that's where the real peace lives, not in the future when you've figured it all out, but right now in the middle of not knowing, in the heart of the uncertainty. Find this strange, quiet place where understanding has taken you and left you alone, but somehow finally free to be exactly as lost as you are without needing to pretend otherwise.